are unfortunately seeing this whole sexualized world earlier and earlier and earlier, right? So like, we have had conversations with our kids earlier than I previously would have thought, right? Like, I know people who are like, oh, well, when they're going into middle school, we'll have the talk. I'm like, way too late. Way too late. They've already heard about it from friends. They've already talked about it. And now your truth is the second truth. And you know what I'm saying? Like, you want what your opinion is to be the first thing that they hear. So just knowing that this is what they're going to be seeing. And I mean, we've been very open with our children, not like weird, but if they have questions, we answer them at an age appropriate level, and don't lie to them, because they're gonna get the information from somewhere. And so I would rather it come from me first. So that's just eye-opening to me. And I know this stuff is out there, but it's eye-opening to know, like, okay, we've gotta have these conversations and we've gotta have them fast, and, you know, maybe like put a filter on my Netflix.
By the way, it's like the top 3 shows on Netflix, by the way. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. I think I saw a hand back here, and then I'll come to you for 3. Go ahead, friend.
Just to say that, I'm sorry, I didn't have his name, but he made it more of understanding versus judging. That they display topics and issues that, you know, we kind of try to avoid, like act like they don't exist, but it actually puts them out on the table, and it makes it, I think, more comfortable to address them. And you're understanding your child and kids in the show versus judging.
I saw a hand.
It was more of a observation of, in Saved by the Bell, you have already relationships formed or forming because they're around each other all the time. But in this other show, I haven't watched it, but it sounds like they're literally trying to teach a whole generation of, you need to have an emotional relationship first before you have the physical, whereas before that would have already been just assumed because that's how things worked. So coming in from those 2 different areas,
Somebody answer the phone. I'm sorry.
it was just an observation. Other than, I was saying, we as a family watched The Circle. It's the same concept. It's forming relationships without seeing each other, which is what I feel like their generation is doing right now. They're forming online relationships without really knowing who the other person is, and trying to build that emotional relationship with one another, whether in that show it's conniving, lying, or being real, right? And making those choices. So it's just, that was the observation.
Thank you so much for sharing. I saw a hand and then a hand.
Yeah, no, I was just say, for me, to be honest, I kind of have like a different perspective, because my teen doesn't really, like, doesn't use those words, doesn't watch shows like this. So for me, I come from a place like where I kind of, I struggle with what I want to introduce to him already, because I feel like if it's not set, like, he's not talking about it, he's not thinking about it, like, why do I want to put those things into his head and have these conversations? But I do take from, like, learning from him and maybe some of the shows that he watched, and I feel like if I was to use the sitcoms that I watch, it would more be like to have like situational conversations, like experiences that they're going through that are real life experiences that he to kind of maybe help navigate through those things as he's growing.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, she stole half my words, but to also piggyback what she said was that yes, it's like less judgmental and more comparison, like going back to the I statements, like when I was a kid, and not one of our words where, you know, back in my day, that kind of shuts down the conversation. So just more like, oh, when I was your age, I watched this show and they talked about drug awareness. Does your show talk about drug awareness? I'm not interested in that show, but if it brings a conversation to the table, then that helps. And going back to what she said about understanding those comparisons.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Last person, go for it.
Okay, so again, we don't watch a lot of those shows, but because we're a very active family. My son is going into 9th grade. He is very baseball driven. So even when he watches some shows that he does watch, we always have an open communication of what he sees versus how that person is acting correctly or incorrectly. I say, because you are always influenced by your peers, by your family, by everything that's going around. So if you want to become something eventually, as a Major League Baseball, that's his dream, every kid's dream, right? But if you want to be somewhere, you have to act accordingly so that you can make those your goals. So I always bring everything back to perspective. Now, does that align with what you want to be in the future? And then we have an open discussion about all of that. So that's just how our family works.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do, okay? Remember I told you to go back to your 16-year-old self. We're going to go back to that person again, all right? I want you to think long and hard about who you were internally and externally, how you presented yourself at 16. What were some thoughts and things? And I know for some we have to travel further than others, but it's okay. But I want you to make that journey. And here's what I want you to capture when you make that journey, because in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to do something with that information. I'm going to ask you to partner with another person, and I want you to give them this information. If I were to go back and talk to my 16-year-old self, what would I tell that 16-year-old self now that I've lived the life that I've lived through to this point? And I want us to take this moment and think about it as it relates to perspective taking and talking to teens. One more time. Revisit that 16-year-old self and say, 16-year-old self, listen. And I want you to share what that listen would be with a partner. And I want you to frame it under the context of perspective taking and how to relate that to teens. 2 minutes on the clock, partner up with someone near you and have the conversation. Any questions for me before we start? I would like for you to partner with someone because it's a very intimate conversation, okay? 2 people, partner. One person chooses to go first, the other person chooses to go second, okay? If we have to situate it in 3, we can, but it takes a little bit of less time, okay? Questions for me? All right, 2 minutes on the clock and go.